Our last speaker of this session, Pamela Barrie. She will round things out today and present on her talk, Emblem and Mechanism, George Clymer's Columbian Press as Neoclassical Hieroglyph. Pamela teaches literature and writing at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, where she is an associate adjunct professor of liberal arts. Pamela has taught letterpress printing at Artist Bookworks and the history of the book at Columbia College Center for Paper and the Book in Chicago. She was also a member of the Green Window Printers, has produced limited edition broadsides with the Poetry Center of Chicago, and has made small books and ephemera under her imprint Hellbox Press. Please welcome Pamela Barrie.
Let me get the proper view up here. Oh dear. This is a different, where do I go to? Screen view. Yes. Thank you. Where's the I need the presenter view.
Use a microphone.
So that I can have the presenter view while the screen view is up there? Okay,
Yeah, thank you.
Because my text is on.
Sure.
And you can gaze at Mr. Clymer while we're waiting. Smaller type size. Yeah, I'm used to a mouse. Just by touching that. Okay. And back. Excellent. Thank you. As you can see, I'm more used to working on a printing press than on a computer. I still need to make the text smaller here.
Where did you go?
One more. Yeah. Hers is on Windows. I need to have the smaller text. No. I don't. Thank you for waiting. I wanted to say that this, my research was inspired by Jeffrey Grove's talk last year at Rochester, actually more by the question and answer session that followed it, where the first question that was asked about the Columbian hand press that he had renovated was, why the excess? And it sort of proceeded from there. So I thank Mr. Groves for inspiring this. Much as research on George Clymer's Columbian Press has focused on its mechanical and manufacturing history, few writers have been able to resist commenting on its appearance. Jacob Kanan opened his 1950 study with the, quote, astonishment, unquote, felt by moderns that such a, quote, cumbersome, fantastically ornate instrument, unquote, came to be so highly regarded by practical printers. While James Moran has Clymer, quote, taking advantage of the development of cast iron techniques to indulge in an orgy of symbolic decoration. Both writers go on to advance plausible explanations, though their arguments are somewhat at odds. Kanan supposes the ornament was inspired by American patriotism, and that the inventor underestimated the offense given to printers in Britain when he brought his invention there in 1817. Only their practicality overcame the resistance. Moran, likewise perplexed by the British embrace of the Eagle Press, credits instead Clymer's marketing savvy. The Columbian's bizarre, quote-unquote, appearance was calculated to make an unforgettable impression, and thus the Eagle made me buy it. With some variation in embroidering, remarks on the bizarre and excessive decoration of the press, along with these two explanations, have been repeated everywhere in print and on the web, giving rise to the notion that Clymer was either a clueless ultranationalist or a madman before his time. But when we look for contemporary views on Clymer's famous testimonials, those who mention the Columbian's appearance see nothing bizarre or cumbersome about it at all. For example, Kent's Weekly Dispatch from 1818 declares that the form of the Columbian press presents an elegant object to the eye, ornamented besides with much classical taste and fancy, and finds Britons have been, quote, barbarians, quote unquote, by contrast. Further quotes on the beauty, taste, and elegance of the press could be added, as well as on its, quote, simplicity of construction. Clearly, we need to remove a few blinders to see the Columbian as Clymer's contemporaries did. First, there is our attitude toward cast iron decoration, famously censured by Ruskin as imitative and dishonest, and in the view of modernists, nothing short of irrational when applied to machinery. But what has also been missed is the stylistic context. Clymer decorated his innovative press in the height of contemporary fashion, the antique revival style, a late phase of neoclassicism that has only recently received attention and rehabilitation. Initially inspired by archaeological discoveries, the style had taken on deeper cultural significance in the wake of the American and French revolutions. It was a return, a revolution in that sense, to the pristine forms of antiquity, those of Etruscan Italy, Egypt, and of course, Greece. Nor was there any contradiction felt between rational design and archaeological decor. Famed engineer Benjamin Henry Latrobe could also turn his hand to designing elegant Klismos chairs for Dolly Madison. In his fellow Philadelphian, George Clymer, we find the same alliance of talents and taste, here integrated into a single invention, a modern machine that pays homage to antiquity. By using the terms hieroglyph and emblem in my title, I realize I am inviting objections from the field of emblem studies. By Clymer's time, the craze for speaking images that began in the Renaissance had been over for a century or more. However, with the coming of the antique revival, Greco-Roman emblems and Egyptian hieroglyphs were again all the rage, and the new style required them to speak and signify almost to the point of garrulousness. Thomas Hope, for example, introduced the revival to England in 1807 with a call for furnishings to be expressive as those of ancient Greece, in their use of mythological and zoomorphic motifs, insignia of the gods, and civic emblems, etc. Clymer's Columbian is in fact a striking example of how a number of such emblems came to be united in a speaking image of its time, a sort of animated hieroglyph on four legs. But any attempt to decipher Clymer's emblematic program has to begin with T.C. Hansard, whose 1825 attack has been taken as proof of the Columbian's overdecoration, as well as its bellicose offensiveness. I won't read it in full, as it is very well known, but I want to pull out the elements that have misled many who repeat them verbatim without taking into account Hansard's facetiousness, as well as the aesthetic context. His xenophobia is obvious, but unless one has read the testimonials, one will miss his pointed response to the dispatch's comparison of British barbarianism to the Columbian's classical taste and fancy. In that vein, Hansard mockingly takes on the emblematizing intent of the embellishments, mimicking the language of designers like Hope. In this important sense, he comes closer to understanding the purpose of the ornaments than modern writers, but he misrepresents, perhaps deliberately, several of the press's features, most notably the eagle counterweight. On all surviving Columbian presses, including Clymer's, the eagle does not grasp Jove's thunderbolts. And while James Moran points to the influence of stock engravings, as you can see there, Hansard was a London printer with considerable experience, making it hard to believe he was unaware of the Columbian's real appearance. However, the absence of the bolts or arrows isn't the only discrepancy. On the earliest Columbians, ones like those Hansard would have seen in printing offices in the mid-1820s, The branch in the eagle's left talon is not olive, but oak. And you can see there the oak branch. Here are some 3 early presses still in existence that have the oak branch eagle. Is this then truly an American eagle? Though neoclassical rather than heraldic, the eagle is related in some fashion to the one on the Great Seal, which has been shown to derive itself from an emblem of Joachim Camerarius. But where did Clymer find this variation? Imperial eagles clasping cornucopiae can be found in books of political emblems, and all these elements do occur frequently in neoclassical ornament. But Clymer's immediate source was most likely the pediment eagle of the First Bank of the United States, and that's Hamilton's Bank, right in his hometown of Philadelphia. Carved in 1798 by French immigrant Claudius Legrand, this imposing eagle is flanked by a cornucopia and an oak branch, conspicuous from street level. In the context of the bank, the cornucopia's meaning is clear, while the oak stands for strength, longevity, and utility. Superabundant power, durability, and utility appear prominently in Clymer's advertising. To fellow Philadelphians, his adaptation of the bank's emblems to the Columbian would have been unmistakable. But in the English-made presses, beginning, as far as I've been able to tell, sometime in the mid-1840s, the olive branch gradually supplants the oak. Robert Oldham has advised me that downscaling, wear, and replacement of the wooden casting patterns were responsible for changes of this kind. But I would suggest that the stock engravings finally did have an effect, a case of life imitating art. And here's a few examples of the later olive branch eagle. Hansard's taking the dolphins on the levers for alligators or draconic serpents is also very misleading, and perhaps deliberately so. Only a year before, competing typographic expert J. Johnson had no trouble recognizing them as dolphins, and there are similar ones all over Regency furniture. This conventionalized form, with dorsal fin and flippers morphing into acanthus leaves, first appears in Hellenistic statuary, and was adopted from there into Renaissance art, often with fishy scales added. In emblem books, the dolphin's image is accompanied by classical lore still familiar in Clymer's time, and even in our own. 3 characteristics stand out: the dolphin's aerial leaps and plunges, its unmatched speed, and its friendliness toward humans, exemplified in the myths of dolphin rescue. We'll return to speed and salvation in a moment. I first want to take up some ancient mechanical devices that may have been known to our inventor. The pivoting dolphin-shaped lap counters from the Roman circus are most famous, but these are probably based on the starting signal for the chariot races in ancient Olympia. As described in the 2nd century travel writer Pausanias, 2nd century AD, this mechanism consisted of a brazen eagle that was raised into the air. At the same time, a bronze dolphin descended to the ground. The simultaneous action by means of a machine suggests that leverage was involved. How the starting gate worked was much debated by antiquarians of the time, and may have been of interest to Clymer as an account of ancient mechanics, leverage being famously an ancient Greek invention. The use of the dolphin's horn in racing signals probably refers to speed as well, and there is something equally apt in Clymer's combining dolphins with his second counterweight, the figure of hope and anchor. Hope's sure and steadfast anchor makes the weight visibly speak its function, as well as its ethical value. And you can ask me later why she is bearing one breast, if you haven't figured it out. Mottos assigned to the ancient device of the dolphin and anchor vary. In Alciato's emblem, the dolphin is actually securing the anchor, expressing its benevolent nature rather than its speed. But Aldus's Festina Lente best captures the flash of intuition Renaissance Neoplatonists imagined in the hieroglyph. Its ability to communicate an idea that is more than the sum of its parts, and often the fruit of paradox. In that sense, the device says that results are the true measure of speed. And this is very appropriate to a press that advertised itself as doubling the size of the impression, though being somewhat slower in operation. James Moran thought that the serpentine form of Clymer's dolphins might derive from the paired handles on certain cannons, and they were actually called dolphins. But Clymer got his dolphins from a more familiar source, the armrests and feet and legs of Philadelphia furniture. How the noble dolphin ended up supporting elbows and posteriors is a curious but logical progression. The ancient myths of dolphin rescue led to the idea of the dolphin as bearer of the souls to the next world, APHACONF, adopted in the Middle Ages as a symbol of salvation, and well known in the Renaissance as well. At the same time, the upended dolphin as structural support, found everywhere from statues of Venus to Roman market stalls, migrated in Renaissance art to the pedestals of baptismal fonts, as well as ordinary basins. At some point, the dolphin support was transferred to furniture, as in Thomas Chippendale's design for a French chair. I think this is mid-1850s. Its earliest use in American furniture is the Masonic Master's Chair made by Benjamin Bucktrout sometime in the decade before the Revolution. While the dolphin is not a regular Masonic symbol, as far as I've been able to find out, the meanings of benevolence and fellowship make it entirely appropriate to 18th century Freemasonry. While the dolphin was thus already a familiar emblem to Americans, its antique revival form is believed to have come from consular France, and Empire style picked it up too. Though seen elsewhere in American furniture, it was extremely popular in Philadelphia from around 1810 well into the 1830s. One explanation for that partiality might be the link between the Greek word for dolphin, Delphus, and Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, Philadelphos. And they both words derive from the Greek word for womb. And I can explain it if someone wants to ask how they're associated. It is thus likely that Clymer hired the services of a Philadelphia cabinet maker to fashion the wooden patterns for his press. Clymer's dolphins are highly plastic and three-dimensional, closely resembling those of Henry Connolly in particular. But Clymer's dolphins are active, artfully integrated into the moving mechanism. The dolphin's use in ancient sporting devices, combined with its reputation for assisting humans at need, make it a natural emblem for leverage. Even the Columbian's crucial second lever, though unornamented, shares the same curved shape and pivoting action. And that's this S-shaped lever that you see right there on the side. The power-increasing combination of these dolphin levers achieves, as Clymer claimed, savings to labor, and not simply in the economic sense. They were the salvation of the workman, giving those, as he says, in declining years, the hope of steady employment. Hansard has nothing to say about the crescent and arrow, but V.C.M. Blight, one of the few modern writers to note Clymer's integration of emblem and mechanism, detected in them, quote, a similar alliance between utility and ornamentation. The crescent and its rising and falling arrow indicate the cycle of impression. And the choice of ornament is, again, far from arbitrary. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, we find the tale of the famous magical spear of Diana the Huntress. In addition to, quote, always hitting the mark with no chance involved, unquote, it would fly back to the hand of its owner. Diane de Poitiers adopted Diana's dart as in the Ovidian motto, consequitur quodcumque petit, as one of her many imprese. And from there, the device makes its way into emblem collections, appearing in an English emblem book. I couldn't get the image, but it's as late as 1732, so still around. Diana's unerring dart also often appears in engravings as her attribute, and it's also familiar from classical dictionaries of the time, and period heraldry and adornments. The motto, which can also be rendered, "He always achieves his aim," is perhaps echoed in Clymer's claim in his advertising to have come closer to perfection than his competitors. but it is also mechanically apt. This is a press that hits the mark with no chance involved, and that returns the effort put forth, almost magically. Hansard is correct about the caduceus of the universal messenger Hermes, but with these ornaments on the pillars of the staple, we come to the controversial properties that E.H. Gombrich described in the Renaissance theory of the emblem, its supposed revelatory and magical properties. Hermes and his Roman counterpart Mercury were, of course, patrons of magic, as well as of eloquence and letters and wisdom and a number of other things, which only served to enhance the god's reputation in Neoplatonic circles, both in his classical form and as Hermes Trismegistus, supposed author of the Egyptian Hermetic texts. Both forms of the god occur in emblem books, and the caduceus is everywhere. Mercury Hermes also came to be nearly synonymous with alchemy, perpetuating the god's esoteric reputation. While these ideas faded with the Enlightenment, speculative Freemasonry preserved the wisdom-transmitting role of the Egyptian Hermes in its constitutions, and adopted the classical Mercury into its regalia. As you can see here, the statue of Mercury's in this famous Viennese painting, which supposedly shows the initiation of Mozart. And this is a deacon's badge right here. While elsewhere assigned the blandly classical roles of herald and patron of commerce, as you've mentioned, the god did retain something of his reputation for access to a higher wisdom. Did Clymer mean to evoke any of this by placing the caduceus on the pillars of his press, as antediluvian wisdom was believed to have been recovered by the Egyptian Hermes from two pillars that survived fire and flood? Saving magic for a final comment, I will advance a theory about their revelatory or intuitive function. E.H. Gombrich explains that this arose from the notion that visual grasp of a complex image as a synoptic whole seems like a closer approach to divine intellect than the slower deciphering of discursive reason. By the same token, such images were thought to participate in the Platonic forms, rather than simply referring to them at a distance in the matter of allegory or metaphor. While it is tempting to speculate that Clymer's antique emblems may have retained something of their revelatory aura, as in Freemasonry, I think it's safer to say that they were intuitive in a more practical sense. In schematic renderings, and in the rare unornamented versions of the Columbian, the mechanism presents a daunting tangle of asymmetry. Yet the testimonials often praise the simplicity and transparency of the construction, even comparing the Stanhope press with it unfavorably. A testimonial from Glasgow printers James Heatherwick and Son, dated 1831, suggests how Clymer's ornaments may have functioned in this light. Describing their first day's work on number 451, the Heatherwicks praise the, quote, simplicity of construction in what appears at first sight to be a rather complex machine. Where the complexity went to, they do not explain. In a word, something clicked. But the Heatherwicks, like previous initiates to the mysteries of the Columbian, may well have been aided by the ornaments in grasping how, quote, one grand object of superior impression emerged out of a multiplicity of parts and forces. Like a more recent innovation that makes intuitive use of icons, the Columbian was user-friendly. Guided by these prominent emblems, the workman could grasp the arrangement and combination of forces without need of a manual. From the revelatory to operative magic is a short step, and as Gombrich observed, in the dark recesses of our minds, we all believe in image magic. Is it any wonder, then, that so many have found phantasmagoria, excess, and irresistible seduction in the Columbian's innocent motifs? The modernist aesthetic, only the latest guise for iconoclasm, has done much to banish the ghosts and gremlins from the machinery of our lives. But as an owner of a gray, soulless Vandercook SP-15, I can say that the exorcism was not entirely successful. There will always be something magical about a machine that reproduces the visible signs of speech and thought, though it may lack the elegance, ingenuity, and historical allure of George Clymer's wonderful invention. Thank you. Special thanks to Robert Oldham, who I've been in contact with, who's supplied me a lot of visual information. It's kind of ongoing, and also to the William Clements Library, where I got to have a look at their Columbian. And I have my credits, which I can. Questions? I can kind of flash through these slide credits while you raise your hands or whatever. I have very complete slide credits, so I couldn't fit them on the screen. Questions? No questions? Were any? Oh, good,
Okay,
yes.
so why was one breast bar?
Oh, thank you. Well, have any of you heard that this is the half-naked goddess Columbia? That is one interpretation that's abroad there. It is not I'm sorry to say that it is not. But, well, think about it. It's not a striptease. She's also leaning one elbow on an urn, funereal urn. Hope sustains, hope nourishes belief in the afterlife. So she's entirely, that breast is a nurturing breast. You can find that in some emblems. It's often depicted, even secular ones, where hope is nourishing Eros, because the lover is nourished by hope. Other questions? Yes.
There is this persistent myth about ego being replaced by the lion, by a
Oh,
lion.
yeah.
Have you ever encountered?
I haven't looked too, I'm really focused just on the Clymer presses, not even so much on the knockoffs, many of which totally faithfully copy the eagle. I believe the lion is present in some French versions of the press. And I know that there's some question as to why the lion, sometimes it's facing one way and sometimes another. But as I said, I'm not too familiar with the symbolism in the French presses. It's interesting as the press goes from country to country, there are adaptations of the decorations to different national symbolisms. So I'm sorry to not help you. There is one myth abroad too that has been corrected, and that's in one of the early writers. They described a German counterweight as being the German eagle, and it actually is not. It's a griffin with printer's balls, ink balls, and it's a very magnificent griffin. But that's the symbol of the German Printers Guild. Yes.
Did you say that you noticed or were discussing a difference between the American Columbian eagle and the English Columbian eagle?
Well, of course, the only thing we know about the American eagle is from the engravings, because no Columbians made stateside survived. That's sort of like the great Holy Grail if someone has one in a barn somewhere in Philadelphia. And so there is a whole dispute, which I didn't go into, as to whether the engravings, these two early engravings, one made in America and then one in England, accurately represent the eagle. But in all the examples that I have seen,
Microphone, please.
in all the examples that I have seen in presses made in Great Britain, including the very earliest one that is located somewhere in Australia, it is an oak branch. The olive branch is just not there. It really doesn't creep in, from what I've been able to tell, until the 1840s. The earliest one I could find was 1843, which is actually after Clymer's death. And like I said, my feeling is he chose these symbols to go with the First Bank, and they were appropriate to the press as well. But maybe people were so familiar with the way the press was portrayed in advertising that eventually they were saying, where is the oak branch? Or you know, Bob Oldman may be right that there's wear to the casting models, and they get reinterpreted then as what you would expect an eagle to have. You would expect an American eagle to have an olive branch, not an oak branch. So does that answer?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
Have you encountered any variations in color scheme at all?
You know, there's one French writer, Monsieur Martin, who has a whole passage where he execrates the horrible colors, the bizarre colors that people have painted. Yeah, those are not historical from what I can tell. What I do wonder about is how much gilding there actually was on some of the original presses. The eagle was definitely gilded, or at least the ones that Hansard saw was gilded. But I have seen one where every single, you know, even the little, what do you want to call them, little bullets are gilded as well. And I think that might be over-restoration. It looks wonderful, and it's very in keeping with the style. I showed you those ormolu and bronze, or patinated bronze, so they're like a dark bronze with gold emblems on them that were very stylish at the time. And it seems to me, you know, he was imitating that kind of thing. And, so they, you know, maybe it was, you could get the deluxe version with, you know, a lot of gilding on it. Yeah. Does that answer you?
Yes.
But I totally approve of people painting them whatever color they want. It seems to me it's, you know, it's become part of the history and the affection that's felt for this press. Yes.
What about other machinery that was being made around the same period? Things like steam engines, didn't they have all kinds of glock all over them?
Yes, yes, yes. And when I briefly alluded to, you know, modernists having issues with this, there's certainly a lot of writing on this, and trying to figure out why they would do something so irrational. Because the machine aesthetic has become so dominant that I think, you know, we've forgotten that utilitarian objects, you know, often were decorated in the pre-industrial period. I showed you those two cannons with the dolphin handles, which are, you know, magnificently decorated, but they're not just toys or a show, you know. I think that maybe the Columbian is a one-off in that respect. You know, it was going all the way with a kind of decoration that there was then a kind of a change when it came to, what Hansard, I think, is expressing an early version of the machine aesthetic when he talks about British machinery not being, you know, so embellished. But yeah, certainly, especially anything that was publicly seen, like steam engines, were, yeah, lavishly decorated.